Have you been having cottagecore dreams again? My name's Christine, and today I'm going to show you how to make a Renaissance era chemise so you can bring your cottagecore dreams to life. You will need a minimum of 4 yards of white fabric for your chemise. Renaissance chemises were traditionally made with hemp or linen, but you can also use cotton or silk. I will be using some linen that I inherited from my aunt, and this is a great project for the Sew Your Stash challenge that I'm participating in this year because not only does the chemise take up a lot of yardage, but I'm not going to use white for much else. My fabric is also pretty narrow at 34 inches wide, so if you want a really voluminous chemise, then make sure you buy a wider cut of fabric. You will need 2 measurements for your chemise. Measure how long you want your sleeve to be. I'm going to start with 28 inches and then hem it up if I need it to be shorter. You will also need to measure the height of your chemise. Now, Renaissance era chemises are anything below the knee, but mid-calf is best. I will need right around a yard of fabric for a mid-calf chemise, which is perfect because that's all the fabric I have. Well, let's go make a chemise. Start by cutting out 2 sleeves across the whole width of your fabric. Then cut a 10-inch wide panel off the length of each sleeve. But if you have enough fabric, you can keep the sleeve the same width and use a different piece of fabric for this 10-inch wide panel. You will need to make a pair of 10 by 10-inch squares for gussets out of these 10-inch panels. You will also need to cut strips of fabric that are 1.5 to 2 inches wide to use as binding later. The remainder of the fabric will be used for the front and back of your chemise. You can cut it to the right length now, or you can hem it later. I'm going to make this project a little easier on myself by finishing the raw edges of the gussets and the length of the sleeve now. To do this, you can simply turn the edge of your fabric and sew a zigzag stitch along that edge. But if you want to use a more traditional method that would have been used during the Renaissance era, you can wait until your chemise is all sewn together and then fill your seams afterwards. You will also need to hand sew everything rather than using a machine. You will have 2 sleeves, a front, a back, and 2 gussets. A gusset is a piece of fabric that sits in your armpit to help reduce strain on your garment. Your gussets are the key pieces to this pattern because you're going to sew both the sleeves and the front and the back to your gussets. Lay the front of your chemise out flat, right side facing up. Place your gusset right side down and line it up with the side seam. Then overlap your neckline the same amount as your seam allowance. Then sew your gusset to your chemise using a straight stitch. And do that on both sides. The bottom and top edges of your gusset should be free from stitches. Unfold your gusset so the right side is facing up. Line the top of your sleeve up with the seam you just sewed. Pin the side seam of your sleeve right sides together to your gusset and sew along that line. And only sew to within a seam allowance width of your gusset. Lay your chemise out flat right side up and fold the corner of your gusset up to form a triangle. Lay down the back of your chemise and pin the side seam together. Fold back the seam allowance of the gusset when you pin it to the back and make sure the top of the gusset overlaps the back just a little bit. When you get to the Y seam, stop your stitching, fold the seam allowance over, and then restart your stitching on the other side. And you probably guessed this next part, we need to sew the sleeve shut. So fold back that gusset just a little bit, fold your sleeve over, and pin down the length of your sleeve. And sew this Y seam in the middle the same way we did the last one. And now you can try your chemise on. Well, kind of. At this point, you will need to either gather or pleat your neckline around the front, the back, and the shoulders to make sure it fits you properly. If you use a measuring tape, you can get a better idea of how much you need to pleat or gather your fabric. And you may need to make slight adjustments later. I am generously gathering my chemise by hand, and I am gathering each of the 4 parts separately. After gathering the desired amount, I tie it off and release the gathers evenly. You want to make sure you have full range of movement when you're adjusting your chemise. Now it's time to break out those 2-inch wide binding pieces we saved earlier. We're going to iron them in half and then in quarters, just like bias tape. Fold it in half one more time and you'll have about a 1/2 inch wide binding. Open your binding up all the way and pin the top edge to the neckline of your chemise, right sides together. And leave a comfortable triangle of binding on each corner. Then clip and overlap your edges when you get to the back. Now sew your binding onto your chemise using the first crease in your binding. Turn your chemise to the inside and fold your binding over. And you may need to clip your corners to get them to lay down flat. And it's best to sew your binding on by hand so it's not visible from the front. Gather your sleeve to the same width as your forearm. You need to be able to move the sleeve on and off your hand. And if you gather your sleeve to the same width as your wrist, you won't be able to do that. And we're gonna bind the sleeves the same way we did the neckline, so make sure you have enough binding left over. For the hem, I double folded it with my iron and I'm going to hand sew it with a running stitch. And that is how you make a Renaissance era chemise. But a chemise is underwear, so I should really put something on over the top. Well, this skirt is the wrong type. This bodice was a little too small and I don't have a snood for my hair, but this is definitely much better. It's been about 10 years since I had full Renaissance garb. Actually, it's been over 10 years. And this chemise is the first step in recreating that Renaissance outfit that I had back in high school. I won't be involving myself in any more Renaissance fairs going forward due to multiple reasons, but I do want to get back to wearing full historical Renaissance cosplay clothing because it's really fun to wear. And I want to show you guys just how easy it is to make your own historical costumes because I know that's a reason a lot of you got into sewing. I do have some fabric to make a skirt with, so that will probably be my next Renaissance themed project, but I'm gonna hold off on that for a bit because this chemise was a lot of work. I was up until 3:30 in the morning last night finishing all the hand sewing on the binding and the hems, and this chemise took about 3 days to make rather than the 2 I was originally projecting. The most frustrating part was trying to gather the neckline and the shoulders because every time I tried it on, the stitches kept pulling apart and I had to start over and it was such a pain. But all that frustration was definitely worth it and I'm really glad I made this chemise and I think it came out better than I was hoping it would. I mean, it looks like a historical Renaissance chemise is supposed to look. And I did even get a little bit outside of my comfort zone with this project because I don't normally work with or wear white. Ultimately, I had fun with this project and that's really the only thing that matters. So if you want to have fun making your own chemise, let me know down in the comments how it turned out. And please leave a like on this video if you haven't already. And I hope you will subscribe to my channel so we can go on a Renaissance clothing making journey together. Thank you so much for watching this video, everyone. I will see you guys next week. Hey, you gonna be in my video? It's my Cottage.